Some of us are so good at describing problems. We can look at the valley of bones and name every bone in the human anatomy by name. We know what to call it in Latin. We know what to call it in French. We can describe every issue in our life from every level. But the moment that you become skilled in interpretation, you realize that it's much less important what happens to you, much more important what you believe about what God is doing through what happens to you. Let me preach this. Let me preach this. I flew a long way. It's the power of interpretation. So he says, I know a lot of people are saying a lot of things about what has happened to me, but actually, somebody shout actually. Actually, I know it looks one way on the surface. I know the word on the street is that while Paul is in prison, that the gospel is not going forward. But actually, somebody shout actually. I know that the enemy has been telling you in your mind that the reason that people have rejected you is because you're worthless. But somebody shout actually. What if actually God was protecting you from people who were not a part of the bigger picture of the purpose that he has conceived since the beginning of time for your life? Actually. Yeah. I know a lot of people are saying that it's not looking good for Paul. And I know it looks like I'm in here chained up to these guards. But actually, while it may look like these guards have me chained up to them, the reality is they're chained to me. I really want to tell you about the word advance, because he said what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. How does he know that? Because he decided that. You know, we spend all this time trying to figure out, is this God or is this the enemy? Why not just go with the first one? I know God doesn't cause everything. I understand that. I read my Bible one time, but I also believe this. If all things work together for the good of them that love him, even if it didn't start from his hand, it has to pass through his hand, and by the time he gets done with it, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. It doesn't feel good at this moment, but it's gonna be good. Right now it's driving me crazy, but it's gonna be good. I feel that. It's gonna be good. I need to tell that to somebody who's trying to evaluate your situation through the lens of your senses right now. There might be a circle of enemies surrounding you in the hills, but there is a second circle. Whatever is surrounding you, God is surrounding it. And it has to pass through him to get to you. It's gonna be good. Stop that. So it's the interpretation. Like Joseph in the Old Testament. Not Jesus' father. Well, kind of father. Jesus' father, who wasn't really Jesus' father, who had to interpret the dream of his wife on the basis of the faith that God was doing this, even though everything in him told him that it was humiliating, and everything in him told him that it made no logical sense. But I'm not talking about that Joseph. I'm talking about Old Testament Joseph, who had the ability to interpret dreams. And like when he was too busy telling other people his dreams, it got him in trouble. But the moment he woke up in a prison one day and said to the cupbearer and the baker, "Tell me your dreams," his gift began to operate. Now, one thing about Joseph, when he interpreted their dreams and then he was brought before Pharaoh because he was faithful in little, so God made him faithful over much. When Pharaoh said, I've heard that you can interpret dreams, he says something very wise. He said, I can't, but God has the power of interpretation. That's not the most powerful interpretation, though, when he said to Pharaoh, you know, there's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and you need to store up in the 7 so you have something in order to draw people in the next 7. That wasn't the most powerful interpretation, as much as when his brothers who had betrayed him to begin with were standing before him needing food. He's now in a situation, and if God doesn't help him interpret the situation, he is going to see them as his enemy. They were not his enemy. They were his purpose. They were not his enemy. They were his very reason for being in Egypt. They were not his enemy. They were the very thing he had dreamed about 2 decades earlier. But if he does not go to God for his interpretation, he will send the very thing that God sent to him away because it's too painful. So he says something really powerful in Genesis 45. He says something that sounds on the surface contradictory, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. He says to his brothers, who years earlier had pushed him in a pit and sold him to the Ishmaelite caravan into slavery, that you sold me to Egypt. That's the event. You sold me. Some of you in here have had your heart broken. Some of you in here have been betrayed. Some of you in here have been passed over. Some of you in here have a learning disability. Some of you have an eating disorder. Some of you have a deep darkness that you can't express with words, but it causes you to leave an atmosphere like this where you are charged with faith and immediately go away and forget what you look like. That's the event. That's the condition. Joseph said, you sold me to Egypt. I'm not living in denial about what happened. I'm not pushing my pain down to the bottom and suppressing it and calling it faith. You did it. You sold me. But in the same breath that he says, you sold me, he says, God sent me. Well, which one is it? It's both. The first is the event. The second is the interpretation. What happened to me does not matter as much as what I decide about what happened to me. Actually, God's gonna get some glory out of this situation. I'm preaching this for somebody who has been in a situation and you've been wondering why. Stop wondering why. Just decide why. Everything works for his glory. Everything serves a purpose. Every Goliath has a sword. Maybe I'll take it and cut off his head. Maybe I'll put it in the priest's house and take it out for my next battle. Hey, thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video or live stream, and share this video with a friend. And don't forget, you can join me live every Sunday. Thanks again for watching.